This is House Planning Help, episode 23. Hi, my name is Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-building or renovating. Perhaps you're wondering what it is you should be building. Well, me too. And I'm plotting a course to be inside an energy-efficient home in the next 3.5 years. Today, we've got a client case study. It's always a good way of learning. My guest is Kingsley Barraclough, who commissioned a traditional cottage built using structural insulated panels. So we'll find out about his experience very soon. Thank you for downloading the podcast. It is fantastic that you're checking this out. Hopefully you've heard some of the other ones. If you haven't, you can go back. And actually, maybe that's where I should start today, because I always like to keep learning. And in episode 13, we chatted to Jason and Lucy, who are about to go ahead with their build. I think if you look back at the show notes, you'll see that at the stage we chatted to them, it was just a big hole in the ground. So that's houseplanninghelp.com/13. But really interesting to wander around the site. It's a timber frame. It's all up now. They're just waiting for the windows to go in. But to see things, for example, the insulation that is at the base of the house. I've never seen that before. I suppose normally it would be covered up a bit later in the process. But having a wander around and seeing that the timber frame is waiting to be filled with this recycled newspaper insulation, which I didn't realise that just gets pumped in further down the line. So it's fantastic that Jason and Lucy have let me trawl around the sites and have a good old nose. The other thing, I'm on Twitter. You can follow me at Ben Adam Smith and have a chat on there. I'm always interactive and love Twitter. But I saw a tweet go by from Chris Parsons, and he was saying, I'm doing this presentation on Passive House tonight in Huntingdon, which is not a million miles away from where I am. So I thought, yes, I'll go along to that. I always find that I learn something when I go to these presentations. And this was exactly the same case. And it's always interesting. He had some great information. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll bring him onto the podcast fairly soon. But excitingly, beforehand, it was a networking session. This was an event organised by the Chartered Institute of Builders. And I felt comfortable talking about Passive House as a topic, and in some cases even felt more knowledgeable than some of the people there, which was just, whoa, what's going on here? Because I know I've only just scratched the surface, but it's nice to feel that I'm progressing forward, and hopefully you listening to this podcast, you are finding it useful and learning something from it too. So with that said, let's get into the main content of this session. I want to say a quick hello to Dr. Shorrock, who emailed a little while ago and wanted to know a bit more about structural insulated panels for the project that he was working on. Well, our interview today is with a man who commissioned a house using this build method. The property is a new build cottage with a floor area of 125 square metres. The cladding is brick, but behind all of that are the SIPs. And Kingsley Barraclough shares his experience of the construction. I started by asking him if he was at a slight advantage being a plumber.
Yes, I think that does give me quite an insight, because I've spent 10 years looking at houses losing heat and being inefficient and putting up radiators, and had a long, hard think about how to make a house that I would like that works for me. And you come down to the mechanics of it. Are radiators really something I want to lose lots of wall space to? Is it an efficient way of percolating heat through a house? No. And it limits the use of the house. So really my driver was how to make a small space that was really flexible and easy to heat. And that's how we've come up with the design that I have opted for.
So how did you form your brief? Energy efficiency was clearly important. What was the purpose of this house?
Okay, natural light was another very big driver for me. That I currently live in a sort of 1884 house, which is very nice, delightful, character house, I think is the phrase. Sash windows and all those lovely features that we like. But actually I'm moving into that quarter of my life where I simply want something that is easy, manageable, reliable, and very low tick-over costs. So the entry costs to achieve it are less scary than the running costs of it to me. And that was part of the brief I had with the architect and with the project manager. And really I wanted to have a more, I think you'd call it Scandic sort of feel. So having had lots of nice quirky little nooks and corners in my old house, I actually want a smaller space, all of which I can use, that there's natural light and warmth wherever I go in the house. And that's how we've come up with this fairly open plan design that I can use any part of and know I'll be warm and there's natural light nearby. And that just produced exactly what I want.
What options did you look at to begin with?
Well, being in the construction trade myself as a plumber, I have seen most of the wet trades in practice for all my working life. And although I love and respect the people that do it, in actual fact, it's not very scientific. And so everything else in life seems to have got a lot more systematized, except construction. I thought, I'm sure there's something that I'm missing here. And it still isn't the standard way of doing things to think about it in production terms. So I started taking an interest in how do they do this in countries that have more extreme weather, well, before ours started getting extreme. And clearly Germany and Scandinavia have their kit house solution, but I didn't really want that look. And then I just happened by chance to park next to a man who had a brief on his passenger seat for a sustainable house. And I ambushed him. That was 3 years ago. And he's the person that I ended up employing to do this build, and it's just been a dream outcome, to be honest.
I'm quite intrigued too that you have this professional insight, yet you've kept yourself very much as the client. Why?
Well, I have watched these wonderful programs where people take off their suits and become project managers, and occasionally they get it right and it's wonderful. But my own experience of project management is that it's a skill I don't have. Although I can be part of a team, actually running a team and coping with all the myriad of things that can go wrong and keeping your own function running is not something that I wanted to take on. And so I went and had a chat with my friendly bank manager to see how they run developments, and they use a creature called a monitoring surveyor, which seemed a bit extreme to me. So I negotiated at the suggestion of my project manager a different arrangement, which was to employ a contract administrator who's a third party, who's on my payroll, of course, but acts as a membrane between the builder and me. So if I have any concerns, I can talk to the administrator. If he has any concerns about me, paying him unreliably or whatever, he can talk to him. So it just produces this wonderful neutrality that means my hairline hasn't moved once during the entire build. I've never needed to actually chase anybody for anything, but it's just been nice to know that there's somebody I can go to without having to get anxious or extreme with people on the site. And it's worked well for both sides, actually, and for the builder.
And does that follow through into the plumbing, because you could have saved yourself some money, presumably doing the work yourself?
Well, I did think about that. And in actual fact, having gone to have a look at a couple of the projects that Peter Carter, my builder, was running, there was such a good chemistry on his building sites that there is no way I'd want to interfere with that. To be honest, when you meet people who've worked together for 10 or 15 years on jobs that he runs, the idea of introducing a well-intentioned punter who happens to be a plumber, it's just not going to be a helpful thing, because I do wear various other hats and he doesn't want to know I've gone off to look after my mum for the day when I'm meant to be putting a bath in. And I was very happy with the standard of work that these chaps did. They have a system, they work through it, it's programmed, and it wasn't worth compromising that for a good outcome. And frankly, they've done it in a better way than I would have done it, because I would have been trying to fit in with systems that I'm not familiar with.
You've used structural insulated panels with this house. Which came first? Was it the architect or the structural insulated panels?
Very interesting question, that. In actual fact, at the architectural stage, we hadn't even decided what building technique we were going to use. So I was very fortunate that I have a good friend and contact who is an architect not far from here, who is familiar with me and came and looked at the chaos that I live in my old house. And then we sat down and had a chat about what we wanted to achieve in the new one. And so he had a good insight into what it needed to do as a living space. And it was really completely different to the outcomes I can achieve in my current house. So I've got lots of small rooms and just me. And actually what I want is far less rooms, but more of a contiguous space which all feeds through and can be used as a big space if you want to. So the sitting room, the dining room, the kitchen, they all lead into each other in the new property. So my number one brief was, I want as big a windows as I can have, please. So as much natural light. The arrangement of the rooms became pretty obvious when we looked at where natural light hits the house from. So unconventionally, my kitchen isn't in the lightest part of the house, although it's the heart of the home, but the way the design works, it feeds through to the rest of the house in such a way that it all works fine. Having actually got the design as we wanted it, we then, of course, had to go for planning permission, and there were one or two tweaks with that. Really very little, other than that the planners were not comfy with the size of windows that I wanted. So we did have to reduce them a little bit, but a bit of haggle, and we've come to an accommodation between the two of us. And at that point, it then became a question of, okay, we've got the planning permission, we've got the design as we want it, how are we going to build it? And during the time of getting planning permission, I had looked into SIPS panels and had numerous meetings with Peter Carter and been to see some jobs he was running, and had decided that's what I want to do. How do we go about that? And at that point, you take your design, or the design your architect has done for you, to an engineer who can rework the SIPS panel method of construction to fit with your design. So you don't compromise your design to fit with the SIPS. The SIPS is engineered to suit your design. So that basically means that where the timber panels are not suitable, they can reinforce it with steel construction, steel girders, whatever, and achieve exactly the look that you want. At no point did I have to give up anything to compromise with the SIPS, and it's a brilliant system.
Let's take a step back. What is a structural insulated panel?
Right, a structural insulated panel is basically a sandwich, so it is 20mm ply on both faces with a filler in the middle, a bit like Celotex material, so I think that's a polyurethane. It is fire retarded and all the rest of it, so it's quite a safe material. I think it's 125mm thick, and they are basically machined a little bit in the way that stickle bricks used to be, so that there are rebates and grooves and fillers that lock all the panels together. Every part turns up labelled and numbered. It is the ultimate kit. If you're into Airfix, this is the one to get. And they all interlock, and you can basically, we put this up at one floor a week. I think the ground floor was done in the first week, the second floor in the second week, and you've then got the shell of your house to look at in no time. Fantastic.
So what are the pros and cons of SIP panels?
What are the pros and cons? Well, the big pro, of course, is that the construction is effectively done the pre-construction, I suppose, is done in a factory. So it's made off-site to your specifications and delivered in a kit form, and it can go up incredibly quickly. Now, for me, that was actually very helpful. Sometimes there isn't a timeline on a job. People are happy to allow 2 years to tick by because they've got other commitments and don't need to move. But actually, in my situation, it was worth a lot of money to me for the project to be able to happen in about a 6-month period, because I've got other commitments that were taking me away from here, so I needed to know it could be done in that time. The precision of SIPs is quite spectacular. So, the construction industry does tend to work to the nearest half inch. That's just the nature of block and breeze. With SIPS panels, they really are working to about 3 mil. So from corner to corner across the building, everything that should be square, flat, straight, etc. is square, flat and straight. The people that work with that system, they build up a skill set where they really are putting it together very quickly. So you get progress very quickly, which is heartening, actually, if you just need to know, well, I wonder how it's going to look. And if you want to get to that point where you can envisage, well, how big a space actually will this be? Until you've got the third dimension, height, it's always very difficult to envisage. So if you're working with bricks and blocks, you've got the footprint, but it's not quite the same as feeling the cube. So with SIPs, you feel the cube in a week. So you can already start envisaging how you'd like to populate that house with your effects. What else can I tell you? Oh, I know the big plus is that, of course, they can be working on both faces at once. So once you've built your cell, the timber cell, the services and everything can be going on inside, as in pipe work, electrics, this, that and the other, and the face work, the brickwork, can be going on the outside, and they are not crossing paths, so you do not have wet trades interfering with the services. So you can effectively have progress on two fronts at once, which is, just spectacular. It really is just so efficient and quick. I can't think of a downside, to be honest. I think people used to imagine it was somehow related to timber frame buildings. SIPS panels, although they're timber, they are not like timber frame buildings, so you don't get the movement, the twist, the shrinkage, all these sorts of things that timber frame buildings were famous for, and quite possibly still are if they're put up sloppily. This is a high-tech building. It really is a very stable material. Such movement as there is in timber is not in its height. It's in its thickness, if anything, which is the nature of plywood. So plywood doesn't get longer or wider. If anything, it swells slightly. I'm not suggesting these do, but that's the only dimension it would.
And you say that the pieces are bespoke to your design, so you get all of those. What would happen, I suppose this could be a downside, if you decided to extend the house?
Oh, no, that's no problem at all. SIPS is absolutely perfect for that. I can't really think of a downside to SIPS construction in terms of add-ons or just modifications, to be honest, because the integral strength in these panels is just phenomenal. You know, you can cut out major chunks and the integrity is still there because the way that plywood works, as you probably know, there's a lot of cross plies in multiply material, so there's phenomenal embedded strength in that, even if you cut quite a chunk of it away. I'm trying to think of what sort of add-on would challenge the strength of it. I can't think of one, to be honest.
But if you wanted to move a doorway, let's say, that must pose a problem or not? I'm not saying that you would.
No, haven't. I can only imagine it might do... Well, there must be situations where that would be a problem, but I can't think of one. I can't think of when I've ever needed to move a doorway. I suppose that's possibly I'm not a good person to ask. But yes, I'm sure Peter could give you a list of situations where it's probably not ideal, but frankly, I can't think of one. And, we haven't had reason to... How can I put it? I envisaged a possible extension to this at the very start and talked that through with Peter to say, if I wanted to do such and such, would it be possible? And we looked at it and he said, well, it's no problem, is it? We're literally bolting onto the side of what's there, which is not much different to conventional houses. In fact, to be honest, SIPS panel extensions on conventional houses are quite an accepted way of doing things now. So you will see SIPS construction going onto the side of existing houses.
And then how do you finish that off? What is the cladding? How did you choose the cladding?
Yes, well, it was quite important in this location to me that it was a nice, comfy fit for everyone. So, all my neighbours have been extremely good to me over the years, and I had this plot that I did not want some third party coming in and putting up a home that everyone resented. So I negotiated with the people either side and obviously presented my intentions at every stage so that we could all kick it about and check we were happy with the aspect and the size, those sorts of considerations. And at the end of the day, we chose what's called a cottage mix of bricks. So that's 3 local bricks that are used randomly, which is quite similar to how these older houses have been built. 2/3 of the facework is in brick, and then 1/3 of it has got a modern version of weatherboard, which is actually a concrete board called Eternit board, made by Marley, which is it's dyed all the way through the material. It's dyed, and you effectively never need to paint it or do any of the maintenance with it. It's pretty good for minimising heat losses, and it actually looks like wood. Slightly unnatural wood, as in the exact same figure on every plank, but it really does look a very acceptable finish, I feel. So the materials really were chosen to be sympathetic. The roof is slate. I'm very pleased with the roof. I actually do go out and just stare at the roof occasionally. I think they did it so nicely. What else is there? Window frames. Yeah, we did put quite a lot of effort into finding window frames. And these ones are triple glazed. They are from Germany, and they were dramatically less than getting them locally. I don't understand why that is, but they work incredibly well. They have all those clever features that the Continentals have, where top hung windows can actually fully open or partly open or have a security opening position. Just fantastic, really. It all turned up exactly on time and all fitted perfectly. The skin, incidentally, as in the brickwork, the facework, is attached to the SIPS panels with brick ties in the conventional way. So it's not just held there by gravity. It is secured in the same way that brick to breeze block is secured. But in all honesty, the SIPS panels hold up the bricks, not the other way around. That's probably a surprise to people.
I know that you're going to have a very energy efficient building at the end of this, airtight as well. Did you ever think about taking it even further?
Yes, I had a look at quite a lot of the technologies from air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar collectors, PV.
Passive house as well. Did you look into that?
I did look at one. Yeah, I did look at that. The zero carbon house is another one I looked at. The Hoff house, but trying to sort of temper budgets and reality, what I ended up concluding was that really the money is better spent making sure you don't need energy than in having very fancy low-cost energy. So we've put a lot of effort and money into making sure we don't lose heat in the first place, rather than having a cheap source of it. So if you put in heat pumps and all these sorts of things, they are quite expensive. And to be honest, I didn't want to have lots of very clever technology that I was going to get anxious about in 5 or 10 years when I'm not quite so young and virile and able to maintain it myself. And I don't want to be claiming on warranties of companies in 10 years for £30,000 bits of kit somewhere in the ground, which is exactly the time at which I'm not going to be up to the stress and the worry of it. So we've stuck with very conventional technologies. So we have got a modern high-efficiency condensing gas boiler that drives the underfloor heating and the hot water, etc. We have put in a cylinder that will accept solar, so it's got an extra coil. And we have put in some cabling to allow for PV at a later stage. So if the efficiencies of those things continue to improve, I might look at them further down the track, and they're certainly worth making sure you can retrospectively add them without having to change cylinders and knock holes in the walls to add wires and things. But really what we have achieved there is a hermetically sealed box with an air management system, a heat recovery system, and very low heat losses. So we change the air fully every hour and a half. We bring in nicely new atomized air, etc. We save 80% of the heat of the air we expel. So we lose very little heat and yet keep a healthy building. And I think that's going to be a very manageable way of keeping a warm building using conventional kit.
And what is the air tightness going to be?
Well, I haven't done that test yet. We know it's going to be very good because one day we had left the door open when it was very cold, closed it at the end of the day, and the next day it was a warm day, and when they opened the front door, this freezing howling gale came out of the house, which must mean it's really holding temperature. Just happened to be holding it the wrong way around that day.
Fair enough. Let's talk about some of the other aspects. I know that getting yourself connected to the main suppliers was quite difficult, so I'd like to hear your story behind this.
Yes, I must admit that is really when having a contract administrator came into its own. I never thought to ask Duncan, who kindly fulfilled this role, whether his hairline moved back or not. It didn't occur to me to ask. I better check. But people, I think, have got the notion that dealing with the planners and getting planning permission is the bit that is going to be thorny. In actual fact, it took a bit of time, but that wasn't really terribly thorny. The bit that has proven incredibly difficult was to coordinate the utilities to come and do their part, and to get it to happen all at the same time. Frankly, it was almost a religious experience because UK Network Power would appear to be an authority that nobody's able to reason with. So even though we could get the gas and the water companies to be pretty cooperative, we were really struggling with UK Network Power. And my advice would be to anybody doing a build would be to get that bit applied for at the same time as you get your planning permission. I know that seems absolutely ludicrous, but in fact, they have a 90 days notice period, even from when they say yes, they're going to go ahead. So if they came along on January the 1st and said yes, they won't be doing anything till April because they're required to do an advert in your local paper to notify people the road will be dug up, etc. And I'm not suggesting they will come on the 91st day because I don't think that's very likely either. So they may well be so rammed with work that they've got this luxurious position. But from the client's point of view, you need that one to be bagged because not having electricity reliably is going to be a problem. And even if you sort of cheat a bit and have an a builder's supply put on, at least just to get the trench work done and everything onto your site, I'd get that bit bagged. I think we were very fortunate that in the end the highways department were extremely helpful, because they are the one that grant the licence for road closures, and they appear to be the only people that have the ability to convince the electricity company to cooperate. So if they say there will only be a licence granted for this period, that's it, then I think that seems to concentrate the minds wonderfully. But yeah, that would be my tip. Have a contract administrator with a full head of hair and get him to do the electricity at the start.
Just looking at the project overall now, is there anything that has surprised you, or any brilliant advice other than obviously what we've mentioned already that we should add here?
Yes, well, for me, I was very fortunate that I have an interior designer lady, and she gets on very well with my contractor. So they both shared my vision, as it were, and clicked really well, so that if there was something that Greta felt was a good idea for us to do in the kitchen, to have the guy who's going to be building the kitchen on side with her has just made life so much easier. So instead of you having, how can I put it, people with different agendas, to have people that really click from the start is just wonderful. So, I mean, I would recommend this team to build anything, because they just are fantastic and totally client-centred. I think if you have builders working for you that put themselves out to get on with your neighbours, I think that is a fantastic thing. So that has really helped for me, because we have had pressure points with parking and things in this lane. And to have builders that always politely get the authority of people whose houses they might be blocking in or whatever, even if it's for 2 minutes, it just sets the flavour for the whole project, that people know they can come over and ask somebody to move a van and be politely received. Those little things count for an awful lot. You don't want to be living in a house where you're the guy that brought those people that used foul language or weren't nice or didn't tidy up after. So that would be my tip for a nice, happy aftertaste.
Kingsley, thank you very much for sharing the experience of building a house, commissioning that, being at the other end of the garden. When do you move in?
I think it's going to be in about 2 months' time. My daughter is the fashion guru on what I'm allowed to put up for curtains and sofas and things. So until she's back from her travels, I'm in stasis. But a couple of months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to access this episode's show notes, head to houseplanninghelp.com/23. We got some pictures of the house as it progressed through the build, all of the links that we mentioned in this episode, and then at the bottom you can leave a comment if you want to. Perhaps you're someone with experience of SIPs, whether it's good, bad or indifferent, we'd like to hear. In fact, if you've got a question for the podcast or perhaps a topic that you want to suggest, then remember that you can leave a voicemail by going to houseplanninghelp.com/contact. All the instructions are on there and we have a message waiting.
Hi Ben, my name's Sam Brown. I'm from the University of Sheffield. We're conducting a research project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council into collective custom build. It's group self-builds to anyone else. I was wondering whether you do a podcast on one and whether you had any plans for that or whether you had any particular knowledge about them. Just a thought, really. Great site. Like it very much. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, Sam, and it's a great idea. So I'm already working on a guest for that episode, but it just seems relevant to what we're doing, so I will keep you posted. Incidentally, I've had a few suggestions for topics recently, and while I may not be able to get to all of them, I absolutely love the idea. So don't be shy. You can send me an email at any time, ben@houseplanninghelp.com. So we're winding down this episode. A couple more things before I head out of here. Elron Burrell was a guest on the Homestar Green podcast, and you might remember we had our chat with the host of that podcast, Matthew Cutler-Welsh. Episode 30 is called Is Passive House Relevant in New Zealand? And although it's focused on New Zealand, it's just a really informative interview about Passive House, and you know that I'm always interested in trying to learn more about what I see as a very energy efficient standard. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It would be great if you could come and like our Facebook page too. It's another way to get more information about house building. We post up other articles that you might be interested in checking out. You can get interactive with me and with other people who are keen to build a better home. So facebook.com/houseplanninghelp. Next time, we're looking into eco-minimalism. What is it? Well, my guest, I'm very excited about this, is Jonathan Hines from Archetype. He's highly respected in the industry, and I think you'll want to hear what he says. So join me next time.